I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times. Welcome to the New York Times Close-Up. In a moment, we'll meet Mara Gay, the newest member of the New York Times editorial board. She'll be covering state and city issues for the paper. Then we celebrate ourselves, the Pulitzer Prize for Journalism, awarded earlier this week. The Times won 3 of the prestigious awards. We'll talk with one of the winners, Illustrator Michael Sloan, who with the writer Jake Halpern was recognized for editorial cartoons. My Times colleagues discuss the week's lead stories, issues, and I'll have some additional thoughts on Coda. But first, Mara Gay, the newest member of the editorial board. She'll be covering local issues, more than a few of them. She comes to us from the Wall Street Journal, where she was a reporter. Now, Mara, I remember when I worked at the Daily News, early on, Reuben Maury was an editorial writer. He wrote these almost viciously right-wing editorials for the Daily News. Then he would write almost viciously left-wing editorials for Collier's magazine on the weekend. Are editorial writers guns for hire who can write anything? I mean, Reuben would say, my job is to do the best work I can for anyone who's kind enough to pay me to write. Where does your own personal opinion come in?
Oh, I'm still figuring all that out. After 5 years as a reporter at the Wall Street Journal.
Well, as a reporter, you got to suppress that all the time.
Well, that's what I was going to say, exactly. And 5 years doing, reporting elsewhere, news reporting. I'm still finding my voice, but I'm not a mercenary for hire. So I definitely have some pretty strong views, opinions, and more importantly, I think values. My worldview hopefully changes as I encounter more information and learn more. I want to continue to report and make sure that whatever columns I write are based in fact and reporting. And I'm just super interested in, giving voice to some issues around the city and some people in the city that maybe haven't been talked about as much.
And you're from New York.
I'm a native New Yorker. I'm from Brooklyn originally. I lived in Prospect Heights until I was 10, and then we moved to the burbs, to Westchester. White Plains, not that far.
Not that far.
So I'm pretty dedicated to the city and excited about it still.
How is it, I mean, you've just started, but how do you think it is the difference writing news versus editorials? I mean, news, you've got to suppress opinions. We all have opinions. But in an editorial, obviously based on fact, you can take a point of view. In fact, you're supposed to take a point of view. On the other hand, that's supposed to be a collective point of view by the editorial board, and sometimes you've got to persuade that editorial board that your point of view, because you are presumably an expert on that issue, that your point of view is the best one.
Yeah, I'm still new to it, but I would say I'm seeking a lot of advice from some really great columnists, Eleanor Randolph, Gail Collins. Also,
you're in good company.
I think so. Also, Jason Gay, who's a great columnist sports columnist for the Wall Street Journal, who's a friend of mine, no relation. But we, I am still trying to find my voice. But I would say that it's kind of, I'm finding so far, it's the things that you talk about with your friends and your colleagues. When we would sit in City Hall's press room, known as Room 9, I would sit with my colleagues, the folks I competed against as a City Hall reporter, and there's a lot of things that we would say privately about the goings-on of the mayor and the governor and whatnot, that now I find, all of a sudden I can actually write. Mm-hmm. And so it's fun. It's a lot of fun.
It's something I've asked Eleanor and Clyde Haberman and other people many times. Is it presumptuous of us or any editorial writers to tell people what to think?
It's a great question. I'd love to get Clyde's take on that.
He has. I won't tell you what he said.
I'm not sure that I want to be in the business of telling people what to think, but I do think, offering my opinion and a viewpoint and making an argument. I want to persuade people in the least obnoxious way possible. It's not my job to beat people over the head with something, but if I can bring them new information and make an argument, it's pretty exciting. I'm super impressed by the platform of the Times so far, and I've written a couple editorials, and you think, wow, when you're at the New York Times, you write an editorial, and sometimes people listen to you, and they actually do what you're suggesting. So it's a huge responsibility, and I'm still figuring it out.
You've been there a very short time, but
Yes.
have you gotten any feedback yet?
I was expecting to hear from the governor today.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't.
That's unusual.
This is not a plea to hear from the governor,
Right.
just to be clear.
You usually don't have to play.
But almost makes me a little more nervous. I haven't heard from him. But no, I've gotten some feedback, and some of the most valuable feedback is from the reporters who are doing the news stories that make up the bulk of our work as opinion writers too. And so that's very important to me.
Now, I mean, you had one phrase in that editorial column today that I could understand Andrew Cuomo going ballistic
What was
over,
that?
just saying that he was threatening to kneecap community groups. I'm sure Andrew Cuomo thought that was an anti-Italian slur. If I know Andrew Cuomo as I do, and his father. But, there's no way to deal with things like that when people are that sensitive to what you're going to write.
Well, I'll use a different term that we used in our Scott Pruitt editorial this week, which is, if he prefers a different term, we could use thuggish, which that kind of behavior is thuggish. It doesn't mean I'm calling him a thug. Certainly I'm not. I have no biases against Italians or anyone, so that's not where that was coming from.
How do you form an opinion? I mean, when you are looking at an issue and there are conflicting sides and you're going to it with a relatively open mind, how do you decide who's right?
So I guess just because of who I am, I come at an issue less in terms of who's right and who's wrong and more in terms of problem and solution. And as a news reporter, we would often report on, a lot of problems. I mean, that's why people sometimes get sick of reading news, I guess. There's no news is good news, right? But so now that I'm on the other side of this, my hope is, at least for the city and the state, if there's a problem that we can identify. For example, we had an editorial last week about urging the mayor to support half-price Metro cards for poor folks. Mm-hmm. Okay, the problem is an expensive city. There's it's a high poverty city. So the solution is let's help people, and that's kind of where I'm approaching things from. But I guess I'm not going to promise to keep my big nose out of it. I mean, if there's something I feel very strongly about, an issue, maybe I'll be more forceful. But I just think I was a columnist in college too. Mm-hmm. And it's been 10 years since I, regularly wrote a column. So maybe this will evolve. So
you're really ready to explode now?
I don't know. I mean, yeah, I think I'm finding my voice. I may have had a little fun. I certainly did have fun, kind of taking umbrage with some of the governor's approaches.
Well, there's a lot to take umbrage about it, and we look forward to it. Mara Gay, the newest member of the New York Times editorial board. And coming up next, Pulitzer Prize winning illustrator Michael Sloan. Welcome back. The Times won 3 Pulitzer Prizes this week for coverage of sexual harassment, for Russian interference in the presidential campaign, and for editorial cartooning, a first. In fact, a first for editorial cartooning for nonfiction narrative. Joining me now, illustrator Michael Sloan, whose series with the writer Jake Halpern chronicles a Syrian refugee family navigating their new lives in America. A lot of credit to share for this narrative. James Bennett and Jim Dow at the Times credited Bruce Headlam, one of the people involved in deciding to take on this challenge. Why did you pick this topic, you and Jake?
It was actually Jake who approached the Times with a story that he wanted to do about a refugee family. And he and Bruce Headlam got together, and it was Bruce's idea, as you mentioned, to do it in the form of a comic. And it was a matter of finding a family that would be willing to have Jake in their lives.
Because it is a true story.
Oh, it's a true story, reported in real time about an actual family that arrived on November 8th, election eve, and their progress as their lives developed after they arrived here.
And Welcome to the New World is the name of it. You can see it in the Sunday Review. You can go to nytimes.com/New World if you want to catch up on it. What is the graphic added value to a story like this? I remember when I read the classics as Classics Illustrated Comics, I was accused of cheating. But you know, what is the vivid graphic value that is added to the text?
I think that when, for instance, my children read the comic, they were able to absorb the story and what was happening with the family in the 20 or 30 seconds or so that it took to read the comic. If the reporting had been done in a longer form, it would have taken longer to read an article. I think there's an immediacy to it, a succinctness that the format demands, because there can't be a lot of text. There's not a lot of text room, real estate, within the panels of the comic. It's quick, it's fast, and I think it really expressed the humanity of this family very well.
Michael, you've done a lot of illustrations for the Times,
That's right.
many of them for op-ed, for letters to the editor. How do you illustrate a letter?
It's hard to describe intellectually. It's a pretty intuitive process. I would get the call from the art director at around noon or 1 o'clock, and usually the art would be due the same day at 5 or 6. There wasn't a lot of time to do research or get reference or to think. I had to start drawing right away. So I guess it was based on my experience, based on what the Times requirements were. Having worked for them so many times, I had a sense of what I could and couldn't get away with, based on how much time I had.
We all try, though.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, there are times when I would submit sketches that might push the envelope, and sometimes they were accepted for final art, and sometimes not.
Were you surprised that the Times was amenable to doing a regular cartoon feature?
Yes, I had never seen one. I don't think there had been one in the Times before. I was pleasantly surprised.
Did you always want to be an illustrator?
No, I'm a musician too, and I think that is one of my first loves. I came to New York originally in 1989 with a portfolio of artwork, but also because I wanted to play music in bands, which I did for many years. And illustration provided me with a lifestyle that would work as a musician, being the master of my own time, working at my own schedule, and being able to stay out late at night and play in bands. And
how did you make the leap into illustration?
It happened.
And your first published work was in the Times, I think.
That's right. I moved to New York in December 1988, and in 1989, in March, I was in Steve Heller's office at the Book Review, showing him my work. And within a week or so, I had my first op-ed job with Michael Valenti, who was the art director at the Times at that point. It was a nightmarish experience because of my own inexperience, not because of anything in connection with Michael or the Times. It took me 5 months to gain the courage to ask Michael for more work. I got another op-ed assignment that went smoothly, and that led to op-ed assignments for the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, and within about a year and a half or two, I was supporting myself on illustration alone.
Were you a good illustrator as a kid?
I drew all the time. I was very productive, starting really at the age of 2 or 3. My mom saved my drawings. As far as choosing a career in illustration goes, I might have become a printmaker. I might have become a writer. I like to write as well. But I'm certainly very happy that I met Steve Heller and had that experience early on with the New York Times.
I always wondered in a musical or a song with lyrics and music, in a narrative graphic like this, what comes first, the pictures or the words?
Jake would do all the reporting and meeting with the family. He would write a script, which would go through an editorial process with Bruce Headlam and Rachel Dry, who is also one of the editors that we worked with at the Sunday Review. Then he would have to fact check it. He applied the same rigor, journalistic rigor, to this comic as he would to any other story that he would report on and write. Once it had gone through that fact-checking and editorial process, then I would get the script and start sketching.
Sounds good. It worked, for sure. Congratulations to Michael Sloan and Jake Halpern for winning the Pulitzer Prize. You can see his work at nytimes.com, and of course in the Sunday Review. My Times colleagues join me for The Backstory next. What kind of week has it been? James Comey has told his story. President Trump reacted with a barrage of tweeting insults hurled at the former FBI chief. Governor Cuomo announced a plan to allow parolees the chance to vote. Mayor de Blasio and his wife, Shirlene McCray, seem to have differing views about legalizing marijuana. Joining me to discuss these stories and more are my New York Times colleagues, contributing writers Eleanor Randolph and Clyde Haberman, and Albany Bureau Chief Jesse McKinley. And first things first, we congratulate Clyde Haberman on his Pulitzer Prize winning New York Times White House correspondent daughter, Maggie Haberman, one of the winners this week of the Pulitzer Prize.
Thank you.
Jesse, let me ask, what is going on with the Working Families Party in Albany and Governor Cuomo?
Well, it's a source of great intrigue last week when Governor Cuomo, in a kind of frantic Friday afternoon onslaught, basically orchestrated, or at least deeply supported, the withdrawal of two major unions from the WFP. Now, the WFP has been around for about 20 years. It was basically founded by unions to kind of push the Democratic Party to the left. And two major unions pulled out kind of at the governor's behest to kind of teach them a lesson. Now, the reason for this, obviously, was that the WFP, which has become kind of a very progressive hotbed, was just about to endorse Cynthia Nixon, Mr. Cuomo's primary opponent. So this caused a great stir inside of not only the WFP, but also inside the journalistic corps, which had been kind of looking for a major moment in the Cynthia Nixon campaign, and this certainly qualified. This was a big endorsement for her. It kind of gave her the imprimatur of kind of progressive policies and progressive grassroots action. And it was a big moment for her and a bad moment for Cuomo.
Other than angering the governor, which it seems pretty easy to do, is it going to make any difference?
Well, we're doing a story on that right now. I mean, it depends on who you talk to, of course. The WFP will argue that they've got the kind of grassroots momentum, that it's an anti-Trump year, and that people are out there and they're fired up, particularly on the left, that they want to punish Republicans and maybe even some moderate Democrats, of which Mr. Cuomo is one. They say that they can get social media going. They say that they can get volunteers going. On the other hand, the Cuomo campaign would argue, look, we've got a bunch of big labor supporters. We've got traditional institutional backing from major unions like
and
SEIU.
He has a relatively liberal record as well.
And something to run on. And I think if you talk to his aides internally, they would like him to talk more about his record and a little bit less about taking swipes at Cynthia Nixon or anyone else.
Meanwhile, of course, the Republican Party is beginning to eye New York because they thought it was a given that Cuomo was going to get elected, and now you see this division among Democrats. It could be an invitation for a Republican to come in and, become governor of the state of New York.
Is there a credible Republican alternative at this point?
Well, at this point, Mark Molinaro, who's the Dutchess County executive, seems to be the front runner for that nomination. Marcus is a young guy. I think he's 41, 42. He's kind of a minor celebrity in that at one point he was the youngest mayor in the United States. I think a lot of conservative and Republican voters like him a lot. He may not be quite polling where they would like him right now.
Neither was George Pataki.
That's very true. I mean, I think the last numbers I saw was 18%, which is below even Cynthia Nixon at this point, who's at about 27, 28. But they, once again, as Eleanor pointed out, they have this dream scenario whereby the Democrats would split the ticket, whether it be Cuomo getting the nomination or Cynthia Nixon, and that would open up a pathway for a Republican to get elected.
Look, if anybody can blow a sure thing, it's Democrats. They've got dozens of years of doing this. You know, the old line about how do they put together a firing squad? They form a circle. And that's what they're in danger of doing here this time. I think if the governor was smart, he would be doing what Jesse is exactly saying, which is emphasizing the progressive side of his agenda. I mean, he has a lot he could point to, whether it's much tougher gun laws or same-sex marriage before the Supreme Court ruled that it was constitutional, and a bunch of other things. Now, to me, and I suspect a lot of more centrist Democrats, the Working Families Party is one of those groups that says, okay, we want the bar to be here, jump that. Okay, you did that, now jump that. Now jump that. And if the result is going to be that they're going to continue to have Cynthia Nixon as the candidate in November and split, well, you know, a fellow like Molinaro could indeed slip in. And if they dump her, which there's some talk that they may do that, and endorse Cuomo, assuming he wins a Democratic nomination, that goes to a question, we were talking about this off camera again, of fusion candidacies and whatever. I, for one, do not believe that we should allow these small parties to endorse the major party candidates, that they're free, well, hell, they're freeloaders in that case.
What they do is try to hijack the nomination, and that began years ago, I guess,
they
really in
also-
the 30s and 40s.
Right, no, it's not new, but it's really time to end it as far as I'm concerned.
Well, and they also have to, I mean, this is an important election for these fusion parties because they have to get, what, 50,000 votes in the
Which is why we have no liberal party anymore.
That's right. That's right. Which may be why you're hearing this talk about if Cynthia Nixon doesn't get the Democratic nomination, that the Working Families Party might either not put anybody on that line or take her off of that line.
I thought to get off the line, you have to either die or be nominated for a judgeship. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a couple of stipulations.
Is she a lawyer?
She is not a lawyer, so she could not. She played a lawyer on television, but I don't think that
Yeah, that's what I
qualifies her,
thought. So what do they do with her?
I think there was some talk that they would potentially be able to move her into some other race and then move someone else into that slot. Now, once again, though, this is 5 months away. You know, if you talk to people in the Cynthia Nixon campaign, if you talk to Cynthia Nixon, she says we won't have to worry about that because we're going to win.
Really?
Of course she
Okay. What else would she
Always
say?
possible.
What else is on the legislative agenda? We're moving into May almost. Is the legislature going to do anything else this term?
I would say that is a small possibility, but not a very promising one. As you well know, there's a special election.
Eleanor has all sorts of things that she wants them to do.
I still have my list.
You can send it to me, I'll pass it along. You know, the special elections that are coming up and the continued situation in the state Senate where you've got a reunified Democratic minority waiting on one vote, Simcha Felder from Brooklyn, to come back home to reform kind of a Democratic majority, has the Republicans both very upset and also not willing to make very many deals right now. So if I was a betting man, I would probably say that barring Simcha Felder's decision to go back to the Democrats and them kind of pushing a lot of Democratic agenda items through, I think the Republicans are not going to be in a mood to make many deals with the Democratic minority that has watched the IDC go back home with Andrea Stewart-Cousins' caucus.
And the governor's now intention to let parolees vote, that is a olive branch to liberal progressive voters?
Yeah, I think it's, go ahead, Claude.
No, it is, and it's the right thing to do. It is outrageous that once people have paid their so-called debt to society, that they're denied a fundamental right of citizenship.
Makes sense. Thanks to Clyde Haberman, Eleanor Randolph, Jesse McKinley for joining us. I'll have some additional thoughts next on Coda. My favorite Ed Koch anecdote took place in Coney Island when the mayor was campaigning for re-election. An elderly lady accosted him on the boardwalk, grabbed him by the lapels, and pleaded, "Mayor, make it like it was." Koch told me later that he never had the heart to disillusion the woman, but he thought to himself, it never was the way she thought it was. That's a lesson to keep in mind when you explore the Times' T magazine this weekend, in print or online at nytimes.com. A collection of photo essays in the magazine recalls what New York was like in the 1980s. It was a brief, boisterous post-fiscal crisis period when, Frank Bruni writes, people lived louder and larger than they had just years before. They also died younger in unforeseen ways. Cats debuted on Broadway. Trump Tower opened on Fifth Avenue. AIDS elevated a whispered illness that ravaged a generation into a battle cry for equal rights. A brutal murder of a black man who dared to order a pizza in an all-white Queens neighborhood reminded New Yorkers that the gorgeous mosaic metaphor the mayor invoked for our diversity also conjured up a tragic relic. As bad as the 1970s had been, as wild as the early 1980s were, the late 80s were even worse. Mayor Dinkins defiantly declared that New York was not Dodge City. In 1989, no one was killed in Dodge. In New York, the number of murders was poised to surpass 2,000, equal to one St. Valentine's Day massacre daily. A rosy television interview with Parks Commissioner Betsy Gottbaum at the Alice in Wonderland sculpture in Central Park ended abruptly when the body of a homeless man who had been stabbed to death bobbed to the surface of the nearby sailboat pond. Times editorial writers dubbed New York the new Calcutta. Pete Hamill has called New York the capital of nostalgia. It's an emotion that he attributes to two fundamental roots. One, in a city of immigrants, is the memory of things left behind. The other, Hamill writes, is the abiding sense of loss that comes from the simple fact of continuous change. New York today is stronger than in the 80s. It is different, but it is still throbbing with unresolved contradictions, with new strains of racial and gender inequality. To get too attached to New York, the photographer Bill Hayes writes in T Magazine, is to invite the city to break your heart over and over again. Like the woman on the boardwalk, Hayes says, we're reckoning with how much our reality falls short of our ideals. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.